to What's Possible, Next Level Thinking with World-Class Coaches. I'm thrilled to have Sharon Danster here today, who is a friend, an SBC coach, and facilitator. She's also the creator of the Leadership Academy, which is one of the programs that you can find on our website, as well as an author of Super Productive. So, Sharon, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Always great to be here and have a conversation with you, Eileen.
So, Sharon, the topic of psychological safety, I feel like that gets thrown around a lot. Before we dive into talking about what's possible with psychological safety, can you define it?
Sure. I mean, I'll give you Amy Edmondson's definition, which is psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So while the term sounds kind of scientific and people might not have heard the phrase psychological safety, everyone actually knows what psychological safety looks and feels like.
Yeah. That's as you're talking, that's what I was thinking. You can probably, there's that gut feeling when you're in an environment that doesn't feel safe, you know it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I think people's behavior probably changes too. You show up so differently as a leader, as a person in environments where you do feel that safety and ones where you don't.
I think for the most part, in a safe environment, you're going to walk into a room or a Zoom room feeling like you can be totally yourself and speak your mind. And there's not that sort of sense that you're going to be judged or looked down upon or feel ashamed about something. And in an unsafe environment where there's like eye rolling and people snickering and muttering things under their breath, you know that that's not a place that you want to be totally open in.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like it throws you right back to middle school years.
Yes.
School years. Like, oh no,
we're never too far from the middle school years.
Exactly. What would you say feels important about psychological safety? I think it's probably pretty obvious based on the description you just gave, but what would make our leaders, it's like, we always think, what's in it for me? So what's in it for the listener to keep listening around psychological safety?
Well, I think at the end of the day, when there's psychological safety on a team, you're going to find that the team performs better. And what many people are familiar with, they've heard about Project Aristotle, which was a study done at Google in 2012. And over a 2-year period, they looked at 180 teams to find out what made them perform the best. And what they found was, among all of the things, the very number one top of the list thing was psychological safety. So if you're looking for teams to perform better, you want to build, and there might be psychological safety, you want to build more of it.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Absolutely. Because who wants to hire in these great leaders, but then have them feel shut down the minute they walk in your door? They're not going to do the work that you need. Absolutely.
Right. Or even at the lower levels, right? If you're bringing young people in and you're not letting them sort of share their opinions, I strongly believe that anybody in the room, anybody on a team is there for a reason. And even people coming in without all of the background and knowledge that the people with many years of experience have, they have so much to offer with a fresh set of eyes, looking at things without all of the sort of baggage that some of us bring to the table. And so you really want everyone's perspective on that team. You want them to feel like they matter, and you're giving them the time and space to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you think that we hire in people to be creative, think out of the box, and that necessitates an environment that welcomes it. And it feels
exactly.
safe. Yeah, yes. Absolutely. So speaking of that, I know you and I were recently on a call and the question came up, if you're new, you're in the interview process and you're looking at an organization, of course, everybody makes that organization look shiny and bright. It's the new shiny object and you can't wait to leave where you were. And this one feels perfect. How do you really get to the bottom of, is it truly a psychologically safe environment that I'm looking at in this new organization? Any questions or things that you can do to help you process that piece of the pie?
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to try to assess before you take a new job. and probably a little bit challenging if you're not aware what to look for. Because as you said, people want to make it sound really good, right? They're trying to recruit you into their team or their company. And I think the first thing to know is that psychological safety lives on the team level. So you might hear of an organization and hear that the organization is great to work for and has a great culture. And at the end of the day, if the team that you're being hired into doesn't have that safety, it doesn't matter what the culture of the organization feels like, because what you need as an individual is safety on the team you're being hired into. Now, there's something called the Psychological Safety Index, or people might have heard of the Fearless Organization Scan. This is a way to actually measure psychological safety on a team. And this measure is broken down into 4 different dimensions that help you to sort of measure the overall psychological safety on a team. Now, one of those measures is open conversation. So in a meeting, can everyone speak their mind, or do people kind of just say yes to whatever the most senior person in the room has suggested, right? Is that senior person inviting others to dissent or even pushing them? Show me what I'm missing when I'm presenting this idea to you. What am I not seeing, right? One person can't see every perspective.
Of course, yeah.
So that would be the first, is the open conversation. Also, a willingness to ask for help when you need it, which can be really hard. And we also know that people have never been as overwhelmed with work as they have been recently. And so to be able to ask a teammate if you have too much on your plate, and to be comfortable not seeing that as a sign of weakness, like, oh, if I can't handle my whole workload, there must be something wrong with me. But rather that willingness to ask teammates for help and to help them when they need help. So that would be the second. The third dimension is inclusion and diversity. So is your team actively seeking out multiple perspectives and ideas and thoughts, and really challenging any sort of groupthink that we can sometimes fall into? So if the leader of a team is really looking to hire someone that just says yes to anything they say, that might not be such a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah.
And then the last one is really an attitude towards risk and failure. And maybe a good question in interview process is, when you make a mistake, what happens, right? Do you actually openly admit the mistake? Like what's the process for dealing with the mistakes as a team? And really what you're hoping to hear is that, and depending on the team, right? Like in an OR, like a mistake could be someone's life.
Right? Exactly. The stakes are high.
Right. But we're talking about in organizations and corporations, and hopefully the stakes are not quite that high. But, your hope actually in any situation is that a mistake is viewed as a learning opportunity for everybody, not just the person who made it, but the team says, oh, wow, like, so this happened. Let's talk about it. How can we make it better for the next time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that in terms of both an interview question, and also just it helps people think about their own actions. So even if there's a leader listening, hopefully that's a good takeaway. What might be a story that you could share with us of somebody who did create a psychologically safe environment and the upside from that?
Oh, sure. So, as you know, in the Leadership Academy, we start out from the very beginning of the 6-month program talking about psychological safety. And very often these are newer leaders. I mean, a few years of experience. They're not brand spanking new, but a few years of experience. And I think in a group that I recently worked with, they were very surprised that it was okay to show vulnerability, and that as a leader, maybe they needed to even go first to make it comfortable for the people on their team. And so we had discussed an exercise that you can do, asking open-ended questions. And a few of them had decided that every time they had their team meet, they were going to start with an open-ended question, which may or may not even be work-related, but just to use it as an opportunity to get to know each other better, and to give people an opportunity, if they choose, to be more vulnerable with each other. So asking a question like, what was a challenge that you had to overcome that you're most proud of. Now, someone might have had a challenge that they're not comfortable sharing, but they don't have to share it, right? We each get to choose which challenge we talk about. And in a situation like this, if you're really trying to create safety, you're laying some ground rules. And if someone is uncomfortable, they can say pass, and there's no judgment about that. This group of leaders, a few of them who started this process at every team meeting, they would ask an open-ended question, found that when they were a little more vulnerable and trusted their team with some of their, more intimate life experiences, they reflected that with the same, and they became a much closer, trusting team. And at the end of the day, you need both vulnerability and trust to build that psychological safety where people feel more comfortable. And so I think they were really surprised that something as simple as starting a meeting with an open-ended question could have this very large impact on building trust and vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of the highlight in that, what I'm hearing is the leader kicking it off and sharing an obstacle for themselves, because I think oftentimes we'll ask these questions and the leader doesn't say anything. And that's the key point, is that the leader participates in this. It reminds me of a parenting conference, not a conference, but a talk that I went to years and years ago when the kids were younger. And the facilitator said right out of the gate, she said, your kids know you as being able to walk, being able to talk, being able to make money, being able to do all the life skills that they're trying to learn all the way through. And so it's so important, even as parents. And what we are saying is, as leaders, that we show our vulnerabilities, we show our growth, and that growth mindset, that's something that we've embraced as parents all the way through, and as leaders, that how many times have we fallen, and then get back up, and how we did it. And it seems like that creates that safe environment, whether it's to grow up or to grow as a leader within an organization.
Yeah, I like that. And I also like that example because the more I have been learning about psychological safety, the more it applies in both your personal and professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure there are things that as you've learned, you're like, oh, I need to undo this or redo that. So
there are many things that I wish I knew sooner, right? When my kids were younger, I would have been a much better parent.
But it's never too late.
Never too late. And I think my kids appreciate that I am still working on my parenting skills, even though they're in their 20s, right? It's not too late to be a better parent or a better person or a better leader.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about what the leader can do who's managing the group to create that fertile environment for psychological safety. We've also talked about, if you're interviewing, how to kind of assess, does this feel like a healthy environment? I'm curious for the leader or the person, they might not be a leader, they might be someone working in an environment that isn't psychologically safe. And so there's that obstacle of, now what do I do? I'm in an environment where I don't feel like I can show up as my authentic self. What might be something that you could share for that person?
Well, I think that's probably the most challenging of situations, right? You're on a team and you don't feel safe. Now, the lack of safety could come from somebody else on the team, or it could come from the team leader. And I think that makes a big difference. If it's coming from a colleague on the team, I do think it's worth having an appropriate conversation with your leader, not like a whining and complaining conversation, but one where you're trying to be objective and offering potential solutions, and also recognizing where you might also be part of the problem. If it's coming from your leader, I like to think most leaders have the best intentions and sometimes don't see the impact of some of their behaviors. And so carefully worded feedback would be my suggestion in a situation like that. So if I had a coaching client who came to me with that situation, I would probably encourage a little bit of role play to see how they, some different ways they could approach it, to find sort of what the right approach would be based on who their leader is and how open they would be to hearing that kind of feedback.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I just did a webinar with Pete Berridge, who, as you know, is the creator of Shift Positive 360, which we use with our clients at Silicon Valley Change. And one of the big things when we're doing that 360 with our clients is not even as much, where'd you mess up, what you didn't do right. However, looking at the behavior you want to see. And so for a leader, maybe I'm just throwing this out and let me know if this feels right. When you're meeting with your manager, to even be able to articulate what you'd like to see so that you can show up as your best self. So being able to provide specific behavioral changes that you want to see versus, I don't like how you said this or that, or I don't feel safe in this or that environment. But I was thinking about what would make me be able to share my thoughts even more comfortably. I'm wondering if we could try out X, Y, or Z.
Right. And sort of a tangent to that would be the SBI model for feedback, where you would say to your manager, so the S stands for situation, in yesterday's meeting, and the B is behavior. When you sort of called out my mistake in front of the entire team, I would be the impact. The impact it had on me was to make me feel really small and inept, right? So it's all about how I felt, not what you did, but how I felt. And then that gives the leader the opportunity to, I really didn't mean that, or, gee, thank you for bringing that up. Next time I will be sure to take you aside to discuss your mistakes and not sort of call you out in front of people. But I think making it less about when, you did this thing to me typically doesn't play out very well.
Yeah.
Right.
Which another webinar that I just did with Senya, it all requires brave leadership. It's scary to do that.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I think the new generation of leaders has embraced this idea that they don't have to have all the answers, right? That they can show the vulnerability, they can be learning right alongside the people that report to them, and that doesn't make them any less of a leader.
Absolutely. And in my mind, makes you more of a leader.
Yes.
Ideally, we're growing until we take our last breath. So we're growing and learning. So,
yeah.
All right. Are you ready to play 1, 2, 3 with me?
Of course.
I'm trying to create a psychologically safe environment where you can say no if you want to say no.
On the next time, I'm going to try saying no and see what happens.
Exactly. And see how I respond. All right. What is one mindset shift that might open the door to possibility around psychological safety?
I think the mindset shift is, while it seems like a really big concept, small changes can have a big impact towards making progress towards building a more psychologically safe environment. So small little changes, instead of trying to do a 180-degree shift overnight, start with one small change.
Can I press you to give an example of one teeny tiny change?
Sure. So if you're the leader on a team, as I mentioned earlier, if you're making a suggestion to the team, like, I think we should work on this project, there's a good chance they're going to say yes, because you're the most senior person in the room. So one way to build more safety for people to really speak up and share their thoughts is to say, what am I missing here? I really want you to tell me what I'm missing. What am I not seeing? If this project fails 6 months from now, what did I miss? Really pushing people to think more critically about the decisions they're making.
I love that. I really love that question. What am I missing here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it invites candid conversation. Yeah.
Yes. And it's really pushing people and not letting them say, oh, no, you've thought of everything. One person is not going to be able to think of everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Second one, 2 ideas or facts that you hope our listener will take away today.
So one is that psychological safety lives on the team level. So when people talk about organizations that are safe, it's because most of the teams that make up that organization are safe. So just remembering that psychological safety lives on the team level, I think, is important. The second thing would be, I like these 4 different dimensions. I think it's a helpful way to think about psychological safety, because otherwise it seems a little bit too vague. So just as a reminder, the 4 dimensions that make up psychological safety are open conversation, attitude towards risk and failure, willingness to ask for help, and inclusion and diversity.
Yeah. I love that. And some of those, even if anybody's starting out new in either new as a leader or you've just hired people in, to even have conversations around these psychological safety, these 4 components right out of the gate.
Sure.
Yeah. And set the stage from day one. Yeah, absolutely. And the last question, 3 actions that our listeners can do immediately to create environments.
3 actions. Well, is it okay to repeat myself a little bit?
Of course. Well, because I also had asked you to get
right
earlier, so I stole one of them.
Right. Well, so one of them would be, if you're proposing an idea, is to push your team by asking them, what am I missing? Or sometimes it's referred to as a pre-mortem, right? If this project dies, what happened? What did we miss? Right. So really pushing to think more critically about an idea instead of having everyone jump on board and say yes. So that would be the first. The second would be, I love this idea of starting out meetings with an open-ended question that everybody answers in an environment that's safe. So it's important to start with some ground rules where it's clear that if someone's uncomfortable answering a question, they don't have to, they can just pass. But it also gives people an opportunity to be more vulnerable with one another and to build that trust. So that would be my second one. The third one would be, I think as a leader, even if you think you have built a great team with high psychological safety, to be open to the idea that maybe there's still room for growth and to dig a little bit deeper to find where there's an opportunity for growth there for you as a leader and for your team to perform even better.
Yeah, I love that. And that again circles back to that first question or that first action of what am I missing? And that helps you to continue to grow and be open to that. And also, as I hear you talking, we're talking a lot about the leader being able to create this environment. And then the people on the teams, all of them have a role and a responsibility to also showing up in a way that facilitates psychological safety for their manager as well as their peers too. And it's a system.
Right. So part of it is for the leader, basically they're asking for feedback from people who report to them. And that can feel a little uncomfortable, really on both sides, right? People will say to me, I'm not going to give my boss real feedback. They'll hold it against me. But if the leader says to a direct report, what is one thing that I could be doing differently to support you or make your work go more easily? It's giving feedback, but in a way that seems easier, less confrontational. And I think it would be easier for the leader to hear it and do something about it.
Well, and again, going back to the Shift Positive model and appreciative inquiry in terms of if we were even more effective, this is what it would look like. When the two of us are working at our peak, this is what I see us doing. And that shifts it completely from, kind of a deficit model to what's right, what's working, and how do we get more of that?
Right. Amplifying the good. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So, final sentence. What's possible? Get ready.
Wait, there's more?
I'll give you a minute. This is your closing sentence, your closing argument for psychological safety. What's possible when there is a psychologically safe environment?
That if you are able to create a psychologically safe environment, you will bring the best out of the people on that team.
Excellent. Thank you. If you are able to create a psychologically safe environment, you will bring out the best of the people on your team. Boom. That is awesome. And who doesn't want the best of their people? So,
well, yeah.
thank you so much, Sharon, for spending time. I always have fun with you. So thank you.